Jonathan Blake had just dropped his last chip into the bottomless void of a vending machine when the light hit him. It wasn't the soft flicker of a faulty bulb, nor the glare of a street lamp outside his apartment window. No, this was the kind of light that made him squint, whistle involuntarily, and reconsider every poor life decision that had led him to arguing with a machine over a bag of cheddar crisps. The moment stretched, a slow-motion spectacle that made his stomach flop like a fish at a summer fair. Then, without so much as a warning, the world gave way to something altogether stranger, something he immediately suspected would make him reconsider even his most imaginative nightmares. He landed, if you could call it that, on a floor that shimmered like liquid silver. His knees protested, his socks suddenly felt like they were made of wet newspaper, and a voice, melodic but tinged with authority, echoed through the chamber. "Jonathan Blake, you are summoned." Jonathan's first thought was, are they hiring? Because I think I just got recruited into a cosmic prank show. He blinked at the figure seated before him, a woman whose presence made gravity feel polite rather than mandatory. Her long ears arched elegantly above her head, each movement subtle but deliberate, like a conductor coaxing invisible symphonies. Her eyes, wide and luminous, caught the light in a way that made him feel like he had accidentally stared into twin moons. Jonathan opened his mouth, closed it again, then muttered, "I assume there's a manual for this." The Queen's lips twitched in a way that could have been amusement or mild judgment. It was impossible to tell. "You are far too casual for an interstellar audience," she said, her voice rolling like warm honey over rocks. Jonathan considered replying with sarcasm, but settled for, "I specialize in casual. It's my brand." The Queen's ears twitched. Jonathan decided that was close enough to a laugh, though he could not have sworn whether she had intended it that way. The chamber around him flickered, projecting constellations that moved with a gentle whimsy, like the universe itself had a sense of humor. "This is the astral throne room," the Queen said, gesturing at the holographic starfield. "It is customary to remain standing until—" She paused, and Jonathan, seeing his cue, attempted a bow, which ended in a wobble that felt vaguely like a cat attempting gymnastics. She said nothing, but her gaze suggested she would have enjoyed a slow-motion replay, just for the amusement of watching a human defy basic balance physics. "I didn't sign any waivers about interstellar gravity," Jonathan said, brushing invisible dust off his jacket. "I'm a simple man. I like coffee, tacos, and occasionally avoiding embarrassing deaths." The Queen's ears flicked again. Jonathan suspected he had just invented a universal joke format, though whether it would survive alien translation was another matter. "You are here because humans are," she paused as if weighing the meaning of her words carefully, "peculiarly capable." Jonathan squinted, trying to decipher whether that was praise or a euphemism for cosmic chaos. "Capable of?" he asked cautiously, "making a mess, losing your keys in black holes." The Queen inclined her head, and Jonathan noted a faint shimmer in her skin as if her form were lightly dusted with starlight. "Yes. And yet in your messiness there is utility. You think unpredictably, you act irrationally, you laugh at things that should terrify you, and sometimes you survive." Jonathan chuckled nervously. "I mean, surviving is kind of my thing, usually with coffee and duct tape." The Queen's lips twitched again, and this time Jonathan was almost sure it was amusement. A small, floating orb appeared beside him, spinning lazily like it was on holiday. "This is a standard courtesy," the Queen said. "It will observe you and ensure no immediate catastrophes occur." Jonathan, who had tripped over a laundry basket 5 minutes earlier, gave the orb a side-eye. "Friendly, judging, got it. Very reassuring." She finally leaned forward, her long ears twitching like antennae detecting subtle signals he couldn't comprehend. "Your species' sense of humor," she said softly, "is dangerous and oddly effective. That is why you were summoned. That and you have a unique capacity for—" She stopped, smiled faintly, and added, "messing things up in precisely the correct way." Jonathan felt a swell of pride tinged with terror. He wasn't entirely sure whether this was a compliment or a death sentence. For a long moment, they regarded each other. The room shimmered, stars swirled, and Jonathan began to wonder if he would ever eat another taco without remembering the way the light had swallowed him. Then the Queen's gaze softened slightly, and Jonathan, in a rush of nervous confidence, attempted a joke about universal etiquette. The punchline was terrible, but the Queen's ears twitched in a way that suggested she appreciated the effort. He grinned, realizing that somehow, amidst cosmic stakes and alien observation, He had just taken his first step toward surviving an interstellar audience, awkwardly, humorously, and entirely alive. Jonathan had barely caught his breath when the chamber shifted, the floor rippling like liquid mercury beneath his feet. The stars that had once hovered in pleasant constellations now rearranged themselves into what appeared to be a galactic game of tic-tac-toe, and Jonathan's stomach reminded him sharply that he had never been particularly good at anything requiring spatial awareness. "So," he said cautiously, "is this recreational astronomy or a subtle form of torture?" The Queen's ears twitched in a pattern Jonathan would later come to recognize as amusement, though at the time he thought she might be calculating the exact velocity needed to eject him from orbit. She gestured at the shifting constellations. "This is a demonstration of galactic diplomacy. Observe. Every choice, every negotiation affects not just your world, but countless others. And sometimes," she added with a subtle curl of her lips, "it affects furniture, sentient furniture specifically." Jonathan nearly choked. "Sentient furniture?" he asked, eyes wide. "You mean like a coffee table that argues with me about politics?" The Queen nodded gravely. "And occasionally judges your posture, a frequent problem for humans." Jonathan rubbed his neck nervously. "Noted, stand tall. Smile politely, don't provoke the Ottoman Council." The chamber shifted again, this time forming a corridor lined with floating panels, each displaying a different alien species engaged in what could only loosely be called conversation. Jonathan leaned closer to one of the panels, squinting at a creature that resembled a cross between a jellyfish and a librarian. "Is that arguing about interstellar tariffs?" he whispered. The Queen's laugh, a low, musical vibration, echoed across the corridor. "Precisely, and your species' approach, though chaotic, has been observed to diffuse tensions in unexpected ways." Jonathan scratched his head. "So basically I'm a cosmic wild card. Got it, this is reassuring." The Queen's long ears twitched once more, a subtle punctuation to her words. "Yes, you are here because humans do not always follow expected patterns. You improvise, you misstep, you laugh at things others might find frightening, and sometimes in doing so you save lives or at least prevent catastrophic boredom." Jonathan had to suppress a snort. "I mean, I do have a talent for keeping meetings lively, but saving lives sounds ambitious." The Queen's eyes narrowed, twinkling faintly like distant stars. "Ambition is optional, curiosity is essential. And humor," she added, "is occasionally lethal." Jonathan tilted his head. "Lethal humor, got it. I'll have to be careful with my taco jokes then." Before he could elaborate, a small, hovering creature zipped past him, leaving a trail of luminous particles like cosmic glitter. Jonathan jumped back, narrowly avoiding a collision. "Friendly?" he asked cautiously. The Queen's lips curled faintly. "Yes, mostly its behavior is unpredictable, much like yours. You will find common ground." Jonathan groaned. "Great. I've already bonded with sentient furniture, now it's glitter-puking space squirrels." "Perfect." The Queen's ears twitched in what Jonathan was certain was the alien equivalent of a wink. She guided him toward a table that hovered midair, its surface displaying projections of interstellar maps that twisted and shifted like liquid glass. "This is the Council of Systems. Decisions made here ripple across light years. One wrong move and an entire planetary economy collapses. Or worse, someone might sneeze in a highly inappropriate direction." Jonathan leaned over the projection, peering at swirling clusters of stars. "Okay, so, hypothetically, if I accidentally tripped over a quantum flux field, would that count as a diplomatic faux pas?" The Queen's laugh echoed softly, a gentle vibration that made the air hum. "Yes. And yes, you would be responsible for cleaning up the metaphysical mess." Jonathan's hands hovered uncertainly above the map. "I mean, I'm more of a clean-up-after-yourself kind of guy, not a repair-reality guy." The Queen studied him with a patience that made Jonathan squirm. "You will learn quickly, or at least adapt amusingly. That is why you were summoned. We require someone capable of navigating chaos without collapsing entirely. Your species has certain talents in this area." Jonathan rubbed the back of his neck, imagining the last time he had navigated chaos, 3 cats, a blender, and a spilled cup of coffee. "I think I'm overqualified then," he muttered, earning another subtle twitch of her long ears. Hours, or perhaps minutes, time was slippery here, passed as the Queen introduced him to increasingly absurd scenarios. Negotiating with a species whose language consisted entirely of bubbles, mediating a dispute between orbiting plants, and learning the delicate art of complimenting a sentient asteroid without offending it. Jonathan stumbled, laughed, and occasionally panicked. But through each trial, the Queen remained patient, offering guidance wrapped in dry humor that kept the tension from overwhelming him. "You see," she said finally, "diplomacy is rarely about power or strategy. Often it is about observation, timing, and not taking yourself too seriously." Jonathan grinned. "So basically, don't trip over anything sentient, keep making jokes, and hope someone likes me." The Queen's eyes gleamed faintly. "Precisely. And perhaps in doing so you will discover that the universe is not as terrifying as it seems, merely complicated. Chaotic, ridiculously amusing at times." Jonathan leaned back, letting the floating panels swirl around him. He could almost hear the universe itself chuckling along with him, as if the stars had a sense of humor just waiting for the right human to stumble into it. And in that moment, he realized that perhaps, just perhaps, he was exactly the kind of human this alien world needed. Awkward, sarcastic, and dangerously unpredictable. Jonathan had spent what felt like several lifetimes, or maybe just a few cosmic minutes, practicing the delicate art of interstellar diplomacy under the watchful eyes of the alien queen. The chamber had transformed again, this time into a grand arena of floating platforms, each hovering above nothingness, connected by strands of light that pulsed like arteries. He had been told repeatedly not to fall, not to offend, and not to trip over sentient artifacts. Jonathan, who had tripped over a broom once and earned a week-long lecture from a kindergarten teacher, was now tasked with negotiating peace between two star systems that disagreed on the correct color of their respective suns. He muttered under his breath, "I've gone from taco disputes to cosmic color wars. My resume is impressive." The Queen appeared beside him, ears arching with what Jonathan had come to recognize as a mixture of expectation and bemusement. "You are ready," she said, though her tone carried the faintest trace of skepticism. "Or at least ready enough not to cause an intergalactic incident within the first hour." Jonathan gave a small salute, which he immediately regretted when his hand collided with a floating console. "Affirmative," he said, trying to sound confident, "but disclaimers apply." The first delegation arrived, a trio of crystalline beings who communicated by refracting light in complicated patterns. Jonathan blinked several times, then attempted a joke about prism etiquette, which earned him a polite series of flashes that he interpreted as amusement. Encouraged, he navigated the discussion with a mix of literal translation, humor, and an occasional misstep that, surprisingly, broke the tension. "See," the Queen whispered as he dodged a particularly aggressive refracted beam, "human unpredictability is effective." Jonathan grinned, thinking that effective was perhaps the universe's nicest way of saying barely competent but charming. Next came a delegation of floating, gelatinous creatures that insisted on floating in perfect synchrony. Jonathan tried to mirror them, wobbling and flailing in ways that nearly sent him over the edge of the platform. One gelatinous being laughed, or emitted a sequence of sounds that made him fairly certain was laughter, prompting Jonathan to bow awkwardly. "I take full credit for chaos management," he said, "and minor acrobatics." The Queen's ears twitched so sharply he thought they might have detached, but she only said, "You are learning, slowly, but humor remains your greatest asset." As the negotiations progressed, Jonathan realized something profound. He was no longer the hapless, confused man who had been yanked from his apartment by a beam of light. He could read subtle cues, anticipate reactions, and navigate absurdly complex social interactions with a confidence he hadn't known he possessed. He still tripped occasionally, and his jokes were sometimes painfully awkward, but they were tools now, bridges that allowed alien species to communicate where logic alone failed. The final challenge came unexpectedly. A small, rogue, interdimensional creature darted through the arena, threatening to collide with a fragile energy conduit that could destabilize the entire meeting. Jonathan lunged, catching it with a flailing, chaotic grace that somehow worked. He held it triumphantly, panting. "And that," he said, "is how humans save the day, one accidental heroics at a time." The Queen's ears twitched, her eyes reflecting the stars above. "Precisely. Sometimes survival and diplomacy are inseparable from spectacle." At the close of the session, all delegations had agreed to a tentative truce, guided more by Jonathan's unexpected charm and comedic missteps than any formal strategy. The Queen stood, her long ears moving in what Jonathan now recognized as approval. "You have succeeded in a way that was impossible to predict, human," she said. "You have brought laughter, clarity, and improbable wisdom to this council. Jonathan scratched his head. Improbable wisdom, huh? I can live with that, makes a great LinkedIn skill. Before he could add more, the light that had first summoned him reappeared, signaling his return. Jonathan hesitated, realizing he would miss the strange, whimsical rhythm of interstellar diplomacy. The Queen's hand extended, and he shook it, feeling the faint pulse of energy that seemed to resonate with the stars themselves. "Remember," she said softly, "the universe favors those who approach it with curiosity, courage, and a willingness to laugh when everything goes wrong." Back in his apartment, Jonathan blinked at the familiar glow of his vending machine. The taco he had abandoned minutes, hours before was still there, waiting. Nothing seemed different, and yet everything had changed. He had crossed galaxies, survived alien scrutiny, and learned that humor could be as powerful as any weapon or strategy. Sitting down, he muttered to himself, "Well, at least the vending machine is predictable." Then, with a quiet smile, he bit into his taco, thinking that the universe was vast, strange, and terrifyingly hilarious, and he somehow was ready.